Let's talk a little bit about sequencing. So far, we have only worked with single sequence projects because we really haven't had a need to work with multi-sequences, but there definitely is a rhyme or reason for why you might choose to do it. So when I say multi-sequencing, what we're talking about is that we have our timeline right here. So the timeline is the name of the actual window itself. And see right now it says no sequences because there's nothing in here. Basically what we have is your timeline houses your sequences. And sequences are made up of individual clips. So you can kind of think of it almost like scenes, individual scenes that then can each have their own individual sequence. So it's kind of a way to get started in explaining it. I'm just going to take a look at two pictures we have. So this was a photo, and I don't actually know what the context around this image is. I actually found it on a message board for editors, and the discussion around it was, this is chaos. You would never have a timeline, or it would be unlikely that you'd have a timeline that would look quite like this. You can see here that there are 64 video tracks. So basically what's happening is your primary video is here, and then all of these are different effects and filters. I'd be very curious to see what this actually looked like. Or another one is here is a timeline image that was actually tweeted as part of the promotion for Sharknado 2. There's a couple of different movies that have done this, is when the movie gets close to coming out, they'll tweet a photo of their timeline saying like, look, it's almost done. But I can tell you just from looking at it that this timeline is not real. This is definitely not what an actual timeline would likely look like. At least not quite like this. And the reason is, imagine working in a timeline that looked like this. What do you think a problem would be? So let's say that you had to make a little change to a clip over here. Think about one change over here and how much it's going to mess up everything that's happening afterwards. Traditionally, how we would edit this instead is that each individual scene would have their own sequence. So instead of a timeline looking like this, where every little clip is on its own, it would be a series of sequences all back to back to back. But in all likelihood, what they did here is they just plopped it all into one because it's much more visually interesting to tweet out as part of a marketing campaign. But let's go back into Premiere and we'll take a look at what do we mean when we say making multiple sequences. So first is I'm just going to grab just a random clip. So here's one from the music video project that we did. One of the things that I do not like about this newest version of Premiere is that when you drop a clip into the timeline, it automatically names the timeline the same thing that the clip was named. So it's right here. So see that this clip that I put in here was called A01E-02, and now it names the timeline the same thing, and it also puts the timeline inside of that folder. I don't want it there. I want that timeline on its own outside of that folder. That's just a little thing just to be aware of. Another problem that sometimes happens with this is if we are in icon mode, your icon for the timeline is going to look exactly the same as the icon for that individual clip, and sometimes that can confuse people. If you recall back to when we talked about sometimes if you click on the wrong thing, your timeline will freeze up. What's actually happening here is that you think you're clicking on the clip, because that looks like the clip, but it's not. You can tell from the little icon right there that this is actually the sequence itself. I personally do not like that Premiere does this. This is a new thing for this newest version. In previous versions, anytime you dropped a clip in the timeline, it would just call it sequence 1, and then you would change the name of it. I personally think that makes way more sense. But what we can do here is we can click on it, and we can change the name right here. So how we traditionally would edit something that was long, we would make each individual scene its own sequence. So I'm just going to call this, I'm going to call it funeral because that's what's going on in here. And then I'm just going to put a bunch of clips in here from it. Sure, I'll just put a whole bunch of them in there. It doesn't really matter. So here they are. A bunch of individual clips in here. And now we can say that this is the end of scene 1. So we have a funeral scene to start us off. You can then create a second sequence by either right-clicking down here in your program window, or your project window. You can then create a second sequence by either right-clicking in your project window, just like we did to make a new bin. You can go to File, New, Sequence, right-click, New Item Sequence, or this little new page item right here, New Item Sequence. Any one of these will do the exact same thing. But now it's going to open this window up. And this is a window that a number of you have already looked at. And we did talk about this a little bit on the first day when we went through the basics of Premiere, but basically what's happening here is it's trying to match your sequence to the properties of your actual video clip. But for most of us, we're not going to know what kind of camera, we're not going to really know a whole lot about the properties of our clip. So we're just going to click on right now, widescreen, 4800 kilohertz. Right now it's calling it sequence 1, so we can go ahead, and I'm just going to actually call this scene 2. And because I called that one scene 2, I'm going to go back and I'm going to rename this one scene 1. So now we have scene 2, and scene 2 is going to be footage from our fight scene, which this was the project we were supposed to do, but we ended up not being able to because the files are way too big. I couldn't get them to you guys. So I'm just going to put some random clips in here. All different lengths. Get that one over there. And now let's just say that this is a completed scene 2. And then I'm going to close this up, and now I can make yet another one. This time I'm going to go new item, sequence this way, and I'm going to call this one scene 3. And you can call these whatever you want. You know, you can call it intro scene, dinner scene, fight scene, driving scene, whatever. All of this is 100% up to you, but you see what's happening is now we have each one of these down here represents a sequence. These sequences are right here, so we can click back and forth between the tabs. You also can close one of these out, close all 3 of them out if you want to, and they're right here. They're just going to pop right back up again. So for this one, let's go ahead and put a bunch of this footage in here. Now notice every time it's saying it does not match, what's happening is that Premiere is trying to be smart and figure out what are the settings of the... A big truck just went by, let's ignore that. It's going to ask us what are the settings of the clip, and it's going to try to match the sequence to it, so that's fine. Put a bunch of other random clips in here. Sure, that's all great. Not sure if that last one went, so let's put one more. So now we have 3 completed scenes. Now what's really cool about this is not only is this helpful just for your own organization, because let's say I need to work on scene 1, I can just click on this, I can edit it, and now scene 2, you can work on each individual one without them interfering with each other. But then the really cool thing is now how do we put these together? We do that by creating yet one more sequence. And this one we're going to call final. And now what's really cool about this is you just simply take each sequence and drop it into the final one. So there's 1, 2, 3. And all of the edits that you've made within each individual sequence are going to be embedded in this. But you're now looking at it as one giant clip. So it just makes everything way easier. It makes everything much more easy to, navigate through. It makes it so you're not looking at a billion little tiny clips. But anytime, like let's say that I want to go into this one and I'm like, oh, I want to make that change. You just click on it, it opens it back up. And then what's really cool about this is any change that you make. So I'm going to take these 2 clips out. When we go back to our final, it's going to honor that change. Now see right here, see how it has this fuzzy area? It's because it's telling me that I've deleted the end of this footage. So if I just trim that back, it's just going to cut that out. But it's going to, again, honor any changes that I've made in these sequences are going to show up in these. So not only is this helpful just to manage your clips, this can also be really helpful anytime you're trying to add an entire, say, filter to everything. Instead of going through and adding the filter to each individual clip, like let's say I wanted to add a black and white filter to all of these clips, instead of doing it one at a time, you could just drop it on a sequence and it'll do everything. You also can create what we call adjustment layers, which is basically another way of doing this, where you can add the effect to an adjustment layer and it's going to link everything. I think I'll actually drop a few videos down in our YouTube folder. For people who are interested in adjustment layers. There's a couple of YouTubers that have done a really amazing tutorials all about it. But that's just another way that you can kind of compress your space, makes everything a little bit easier to look at. But there are other reasons for doing this, besides just trying to make it more visually interesting. I personally like to use sequences to organize my work. For example, I'm going to close all of these out for a second, and I'm going to make a whole bunch of new ones. So I'm going to get rid of those. Let's say I'm editing a trailer for Little Miss Sunshine. As I'm going through and finding my small clips, my little moments that I'm going to use, I can certainly just put them all in my timeline. And as I get a few dozen of these, depending on what you're working on and how detail-oriented you are, you might have a few hundred of these little moments that you think you're going to use. And now it comes time to actually edit these. What you might do is move them all to the end and then just move each clip into the position and trim them out. Or another thing that you can do is you can take this sequence right here and call this maybe clips to use. This is something that I do absolutely all of the time. I will have one folder that's literally called, or one sequence that's literally called clips I might use. And then I might have another one that says clips to use only if you absolutely need them. And then another one that says clips that are like horrible, but if you need to use them, you can. Whatever it is. It's just another way of organizing all of your footage. So let's go ahead and make another sequence. And then this one I might call final. So now what this allows me to do is to toggle back and forth between these two sequences. And then as I'm going through, I'm like, oh, you know what? I want this clip right here. And then I can literally just go in and cut it from this clip or this sequence over into this one, and it just makes for better organization. I do this when I work on documentaries, for example, where as I'm going through interviews, I might, let's say I'm doing a documentary and I've got 4 subjects. I might have one sequence that says family and one sequence that says, history and one sequence that says goals or whatever. And then each time one of those subjects talks about those things, I'll cut a little piece of their interview and drop it into that folder. So then as I'm editing the whole thing, anytime I want to talk about, okay, this is the section of the documentary where we're going to talk about family, I go over to my family sequence. Everybody's footage where they talked about that is already here, so I don't have to go back to my source footage to find it. So to give you an example of how you can use this, I'm going to go over and I'm going to open up the project file for the promotional video that I edited last semester for the communication department, and we'll take a look at what that looks like. So let's take a look at a little bit more of some of the interesting things we can do with sequencing and how we can kind of put some of these skills together. So I recently made a little promotional video. It's about, 48 seconds long for the communication department. How we did this is I gathered a bunch of footage. Some of the students in the video field class gathered some footage as well. And then we put it together, or I put it together. And then I edited it together into this little project. So let's go ahead and take a look at it real quick, and then we'll break down the pieces and I'll show you how exactly it was made. So okay, so that's the video itself. Now let's break it into its pieces. Now this was put together very, very quickly, just so that we could get something up on the Facebook page. But basically how this was put together, let me just back some of this up so you can kind of see where we're looking, is it started with using 2 different sequences to start. I made this one right here, which you can see I literally called clips to use, just like I said I like to do, where I just went through all my footage and cut all the little tiny clips out that I thought would be possible to use if I wanted to. It didn't mean I was going to, but it meant that it was all here, just so that as I was looking for pieces of the footage, it would be right here and I could just copy and paste it over. And then there's one called the final. But what's interesting about this project is how it was completed was, I'm just going to open up this timeline, is you see it's in stacks. So we have a whole bunch of different tracks going, a whole bunch of different sequences going all at the same time. So as we go through this, I'm just going to shrink this down again so we can see what's going on in this window. So we have this first one, and it comes up on the screen, and I will break all of this down for you and show you exactly what's going on with each one of these. And then as one, you see there's a little bit of overlap between these 2 clips. It's because one is moving while the other one is coming in. And then each one of these has a whole bunch of other stuff going on in it. So basically you have the elements of this is that each one of these little bits is its own sequence, just to make it more manageable, and then those sequences are laid on top of each other, or else this would be an absolute disaster of a timeline. We then have within each individual sequence, we have the video, and some of them have 2 video clips in each one. Some of them, like that one, has 1. This one has 2 video clips in it. You have the shaded area on the side, you have the words, and then you have these little animations coming through. So these little ones right here. You also have the ECC logo here, which I will show you that is actually way on the top. There, that is right there. And then at the very end, because I actually stopped it before it ended, that is just a little tiny transition that is built into it to make it look like it kind of zooms off the screen. So there's a lot of pieces involved in this, but it's just a matter of breaking it down into its sections to make it manageable. So let's go ahead and go in here and we will actually look at how this was made. So I'm just going to grab one. Let's grab this sequence right here because it has 2 shots in it, so this will be a good one to look at. We're going to open that up, and there's a couple of different things going on in this. So you see, this is all of the elements that are made to put together into this little sequence here. And I'm not expecting you necessarily to get everything that I'm saying. This is really just more of kind of a demonstration to show what you can do. So all these different elements that are on here. So we have this one right here, and I'm just going to move it over so we can see it by itself, is just this little line. That you see it goes across the screen. And I actually sped this up. And then there's another one right here. So again, I'm just moving them so it's across the screen. Where did that one go? Yeah, these ones are off to the side, so I'm just going to move that back for right now. There it is. It's down there. So that's what this one is. These were not actually something I made myself. There's a couple of different companies that you can work with that you can buy these little tiny movies off of, which are just little teeny tiny animations. So like if I open this one individually, there it is. So that's what this looks like. It's just an animation of 3 little lines going across. This was somebody who went in and they made little lines and then they just keyframed them to move and then they exported them as a movie file. I absolutely could have gone in and animated these myself. It was just a matter of time and I didn't want to. All I did was take it though and then rotate it on its side so that they were going sideways across the bottom. We also have the title itself. So if you open up, this one says personalized learning. We can close that back again. We have the color mats. The color mat I think is really interesting. So what the color mat is, if I open it up, it is simply a little half screen that was made black. And then if we open up the effects controls over here on it, it was just pulled down to 74.4% opacity. And all that does is it just makes this little fuzzy mat. That's it. All that is just a little, it's literally like a black color card that you can make that you then just pull the opacity down. And then it was animated to keyframe to go up along with that image. And then what's cool about this is we can actually change the color on it if we want to. So let's change it to red, and now it's going to be a fuzzy red. What's cool is if we do that on that one, it's actually going to change it on all of them, which is not great. So we're going to leave it as black, but you can change that as well. So again, this is just a matter of kind of creatively thinking about it. So again, all this is right here is it's just basically a black color palette that is then faded and animated in. And then we have this right here, which is the footage itself. This footage, called Shot 7, is actually its own sequence as well. So if I wanted to put more than one clip in it, which I chose to do, I chose to put 2 shots in this one. I just went over to my clips to use, edited the clips down to what I wanted, dropped them in here, put them together, and then this got dropped into here. So that is this, and then the color mat, and then the title, and then the animations on top of it. And then when it comes in, this, let me go back to this one. This sequence is then hand animated so that it moves into the shot. I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot to look at, but it's really just a whole bunch of little teeny tiny pieces then what put together end up making something that's really halfway decent. I will also show you, just because I think it's an extra thing to add, I did have to edit this song down. So right there, you can see there's a little teeny tiny dissolve on there. We are going to talk about editing music in a video, I think, next week. But the song wasn't short enough. It was too long, so I had to edit it so that it matched. And then also, I'm going to go up top, and I'm going to show you the logo. So this is the ECC logo. It's right there. It's that right there. I decided I wanted to brand it, so I put the logo. I'm just going to move it over here. I just put it over everything, so as everything else is playing, the logo is right there, but I had to hand animate this as well. So I had to animate it. Do you see how it comes up? I had to animate it so that it was the correct speed, so that it matched this first clip. As this first clip was coming up, that the logo would go at the exact same speed. And then I also pulled the opacity. You can see the animation right there, those little tiny keyframes. I also pulled the opacity down to 50% on this because when it was full opacity, I thought it just looked aggressive. I thought it looked really big. And then this little, move it over because it's so it touches. This is just a little teeny tiny transition that I actually downloaded from online. I just searched fun transitions and it brought me that. And it was just a hand animation where it kind of blurs it and throws it off the screen. So I will tell you that this entire project took about 10 to 12 hours beginning to end to edit. Now, I did absolutely cheat on this. I did not hand animate everything in here. A lot of this was done for me because I just used a pre-done template. So there's a number of different websites that sell templates to you that other people hand animate, and then you just plug what you want into it. I'm going to link some of those websites down into Blackboard for you. They often have a lot of free ones that you can download and just kind of play around with. And I think it's really helpful to play around with some of the templates that other people have made because it kind of lets you backwards engineer how they designed it. Why this ended up being so time consuming, even though I didn't hand animate every little thing in it, was that the customizations can be ridiculous. So every one of these little lines, everything here, every time, the text moves, every time the images moved, all of that had to be hand done, which is why, it can add up to being quite a few hours by the time you're finished with it all. But this is really just to kind of give you an idea that once you get some of these basic skills, and everything in here is stuff you technically can do, it's just a matter of using it creatively and figuring out, okay, how can I put all these skills together to make something kind of cool?